welcome my friend, Dr. David Robertson.
All right, so we're going to talk about CBDCs, cryptocurrencies, things of that nature. Show of hands, how many are familiar with cryptocurrency or CBDC? Man, it's an interesting topic. There's a lot of things going on with it for sure. So let's start with what cryptocurrency truly is. When we think about virtual currency, we have to understand that can manifest itself in a lot of different ways, but we also have to understand what currency is, right? Money. There's a difference between money and currency. And we often get confused by that, on purpose, by the way. We are being, what's a good way to say that, manipulated. When we look into the Constitution, we see things like silver and gold, things that are rather important. In 1913, you could buy a suit and a gun for an ounce of gold. Today, you can buy a suit and a gun with an ounce of gold. But in 1913, you're spending $30. Today, it's over $2,000. Some of our biggest theft happens via inflation, not actual taxation. And that's sort of scary. And this is what enters in the cryptocurrency debate. Cryptocurrency came about for a lot of different reasons. The narrative that people are being sold is that this is the black market currency. Okay, fine, but not true. Everything is on a ledger when we're talking about cryptocurrency. In fact, that's sort of the point. The cryptography, right? The security element of it. That's what keeps it honest. If you were going to do something nefarious on the black market, probably be better to do it in something that wasn't tracked digitally and that everybody had the ability to go see that transaction. Now, there's pros and cons to cryptocurrency. I can think of a couple of things. We think faster and cheaper transactions, right? That's definitely a benefit. It's globally accessible. If somebody in Thailand wants your Bitcoin, they can grab that. If you wanted to do business outside of traditional currency, you could do that. And then, of course, there's the potential investment opportunity. But that's, I think, too, where a lot of misinformation comes in, because you're told that maybe it's a security or maybe it's something else. Well, currencies rise and fall in value, right? You can invest in the dollar just like you could in Bitcoin or XRP or whatever it was. That being said, there are some risks when it comes to cryptocurrency. Price volatility is a great example. Things are usually only worth what people will buy, and the markets will ebb and flow, and cryptocurrency is no exception to that. There are regulatory concerns. Who's controlling what? Who's doing this? Who's doing that? Indeed, there's a freedom element to it. Some would see that as a great thing. Some would see that as a potential security threat. Then there's the hacking risk. But it's not too different from your online banking account. In fact, some would argue that your cryptocurrency is a lot safer than, say, your online banking account. Debates either way on that. So cryptocurrency, as far as the government is concerned, is kind of seeing it as a bad thing. However, we have to understand that the only thing that is bad about that from that standpoint is that it's a challenge to the dollar. And if you look globally, even over the last 50, 60 years, we can see that anytime the dollar is challenged, the government and the banks do like to step up and do something about that. I think probably one of the most, I wouldn't call it popular, but one of the most well-known examples of that would be with Gaddafi. He tried to introduce the dinar, which was a gold-backed currency, and that was a problem because there was the demand for oil purchasing in dinar, and of course then suddenly it was a problem, and there's that. But more importantly, we think about what the government has said. I mean, even on the House floor, talking about the actual problem is any challenge to the dollar. If there's a challenge to the dollar, if the dollar is undermined, that reduces power not only for the government and the banks, but also as a nation. And so they try really hard to ensure the dominance of the dollar in a variety of different ways. And whether or not that's good or bad is up for debate. My thing, I would tell people to ask a simple question. Anything that we're talking about economically or financially, especially when we're talking about various initiatives, is does it empower the individual or does it empower the bank, right? And when we ask the question that way, it reformulates how we examine things. For those of you who are historically inclined, this nation has had a long history of struggling with large central banks. And if you read some of our founders' work, that was a really big part of why they even wanted to separate, was because of a central control of the bank. What is it? Mayor Rothschild may or may not have said, "Give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who makes its laws." And it is big. They want a way to control that power. Now, several years ago, the International Monetary Fund started to talk about the idea of negative rate. Very big thing. How can we put forth negative rate and ensure that people will go along with it? There was a lot of debate on the national platforms. One of the ideas was adopting the cryptocurrency frame and introducing a CBDC, or a central bank digital currency, which is essentially a bank-controlled, a central bank-controlled form of digital currency. Or you could say it's a digital form of a country's fiat currency. But what does fiat mean? Fiat is a very old way of saying fake. Actually comes from ancient Rome. And we have to be careful about that because that's essentially what it is. It's a piece of paper. Our dollar is a piece of paper that represents something that may or may not exist. CBDCs would, according to the IMF, would be able to put forth a negative rate. And the reason why this was important, some of the things that they had talked about, if they did this, then you wouldn't be able to put your money under your pillow. Almost a direct quote. Right? So then we spiral into the Keynesian economic nightmare even further, negative rates instated, and you are then almost forced to spend so you don't lose your money. And so there's that dark thread that comes along with some of this. And it's interesting too because evidently the CBDC is okay, cryptocurrency is not. Again, it's a challenge. In fact, I could go through several quotes here. One of the things that I wanted to share specifically is that it's been theorized if they were going to introduce a CBDC, all of the things that would have to occur to ensure that that happened. One of the theories is that if they introduce a CBDC, they would have to eliminate dollar debt because it would be not to their advantage to cross over a one-for-one, right? So if they introduce a CBDC, crossing it over one-for-one doesn't eliminate the problem. as they see it. So there is the potential, several people have theorized this, that they would have to eliminate dollar-based debt because the dollar would go away. Of course, the flip side to that is that it would also mean that dollar-based wealth would go away. So again, key is in the contrast. When we see it from one side, we have to almost default to the other to kind of see what that balance is, because there's a lot of wheels kind of in motion on this. And there are a lot of concerns when it comes to CBDC, and rightfully so. Privacy concerns being one of them, right? Because again, the ledger will track transactions. Now the ledger doesn't, at least right now, doesn't necessarily track certain details that I think some people probably wouldn't want exposed, but that doesn't mean that it can't. And it also doesn't mean that it won't. And so I think the privacy concern is legitimate. I think that's something that we definitely need to keep an eye on. The centralized control, that's another issue, right? Because then it's no longer about you. It's no longer about your power. It's no longer about your effort. That's definitely a concern, right? Centralized control means that they can turn off the tap for whatever reason. And the sad part is that we've seen examples of this in smaller amounts around the world. And, we got to be careful about that. Who's in control? And this goes back to the question again is, who's really in control? Is it you or is it somebody else? Is it a central component that our founders were very much against? And when we start asking the questions that way, again, we can start to formulate an answer. The funny thing is, you take that same argument, those same questions, you throw it against something like cryptocurrency, and all of a sudden that even begins to change, right? The tone for CBDC versus cryptocurrency begins to change. Of course, on both sides, again, the cybersecurity risks. Digital currencies are susceptible to cyber attacks. And cyber attacks are becoming more and more sophisticated by the day. And frankly, all the resources we could throw at that threat, it's a double-edged sword, because the more we learn about how to secure and then teach people how to secure, we teach people how to breach. And so that's just a never-ending struggle, frankly. Then there's the argument of technological dependency, right? Some of the questions that I often get on this topic is, what happens when we have solely a crypto or a CBDC? What about offline payments? Well, don't worry about that. They're working on that. Technological dependence. That's a problem for some. Some people see that as an unbelievable benefit, but technology tends to require power, and then we get into those arguments with our grid and so on and so forth. So then there's the idea of financial instability. Any transition, when we're talking about a currency, the transition always, there's an inherent instability. Every time there's a market shift or an economic upheaval, there's instability. We've seen this cyclically over and over and over again. I mean, we saw it during the Revolutionary War, the transition through the Civil War, the transition through World War II, and of course, here we are again. So there is going to be instability. There is going to be this transition, and some of it will be good, some of it will be bad, but knowledge is power. Our ability to weaponize that to our advantage is going to play better. So I think that in a lot of ways, if it's being thrust upon us, it's like almost kind of like an introduction of a new weapon. Don't avoid the weapon, learn to use it, sort of a thing. And then, of course, like I was saying, the transition challenge. Now, a lot of people are going to default to the idea, well, this isn't going to happen. This isn't, this is pie in the sky. It's not really going to happen. It is very much happening, and it's happening in rapid time and all over the world. The San Francisco Fed is already designing their models. And just fire for effect sort of a situation. Before I came today, I pulled up the last 30 minutes, of course, before I left, 30 minutes of news regarding this topic. I will read you some of these headlines. Italian banks launch CBDC pilot project. The Bank of Thailand conducted the first experiment of retail CBDC in Thailand. Bank of France governor pushes on need for Euro CBDC. International Monetary Fund says common global CBDC platform rules needed for international transactions. IMF working hard on global CBDC platform concept. Central bank successfully tests over 30 CBDC use cases, including offline payments. Bank of England's Bitcoin CBDC advances closer to launch. Now, and that's, again, the last 30 minutes. You know, I've been looking at this for several years. It's unbelievably, you could call it amazing, alarming, how fast and how rapid the advancement of this concept truly is. The question often comes up is why? Like, we could talk about faster transactions, and yes, there is a strong business case for faster transactions. The SWIFT, for those of you who do international business, you probably already know this, the SWIFT system is cumbersome and just terrible, which is actually why Ripple Labs is so prized, I think, in a lot of ways. But why? Truly why? I mean, we can make a business case for anything. Well, there was an interesting statement that came out of Japan, Chief Executive Officer at CipherCore, that I thought I would share with you. Quote, the CBDC reduces the cost of issuing notes and managing the cash. I'll stop right there. Yeah, that makes sense. That's a strong case, right? Our currency, it takes a lot more actual money to make our money, if that makes sense. It costs more than a nickel to make a nickel. It costs way more than a penny to make a penny, and so on and so forth, right? So there's that case, and I concede to that. But the other part, and this is the part that we really need to pay attention to, the digital currency will help the expansion of the digital economy and widen the tax collection rate. Okay? And so again, we dig, and then we start to find some of the clues that kind of tell us why. And when we start to discover why, we can really, at that point, begin to make a balanced decision about, are we in on this? Are we not in on this? Do I like this version? Do I like that version? And then instead of being scared by it, we can navigate it, right? So real world crypto and CBDC use cases. I think probably one of the better ones is international remittances. That's a really strong case. I do like that's crypto or CBDC, right? You can get your money fast. You don't have to wait a week in order to make that transaction to get your stuff. You can do business, at the speed of business. Then there's online purchases. I think most people anymore are really used to having their credit card and information online to do whatever. You're making purchases online. You're already kind of doing it, which is interesting. So, of course, that would make things a lot easier. On the crypto side, there's the decentralized finance applications, right? So we talk about DeFi. Decentralized. This allows you to have a little bit more value in your transactions, which is pretty good because there's not somebody trying to push it down or get their share of that transaction. Of course, it's all based on blockchain, which I think is that's pretty powerful stuff. Blockchain can be used in a variety of different ways. Has been. Supply chain management is a really good business case for blockchain. Digital identity, when you're doing online payment, stuff like that. I mean, there's no denying it is you. And then, of course, there's smart contracts, which now we're getting into a kind of an offshoot there, but really strong case there for blockchain technology. I guess ultimately what I'm trying to share is there are pros and there are cons when it comes to cryptocurrencies and CBDCs. Where you fall on that, I would challenge you to again ask the question, does it empower the individual or does it empower an organization or a central bank or a government? And that's how we navigate some of this stuff moving forward. If we don't ask that question, we get caught up into the hype. I have to introduce something to you called astroturfing. Astroturfing is a multi-billion-dollar industry that is designed to confuse you to the point to where you throw your hands up and say, whatever, right? And so we have to kind of ask the right questions in order to overcome astroturfing, and simple questions like that will definitely help us do that. So that's cryptocurrency and CBDC in a nutshell, and it is in a nutshell, but I'll be happy to answer any questions or comments.
I'm going to carry the microphone around in just a second, but before I do that, would you explain to us what, just for the average person who's just hearing about this notion of a central bank digital currency, what would the implementation of that look like for the average citizen? Will we not be able to have dollars in our pockets anymore? Will we have to carry a special card around issued from the government? What would it look like? Because it's happening in other countries. This is not,
Yeah, so that's a great question. What does that look like? Well, the rollout of that would be somewhat traumatic, at least at first, because they would have to eliminate and get rid of the dollar, right, while they introduce the CBDC. In that situation, I don't know. There's a lot of theories about how this goes. I will kind of give you my rendition, but understand I'm not behind that wheel, so this is just my theory. First, they would have to create a level of distrust in the dollar itself, right? Now, so it could be argued that that's already occurring, right, via inflation and stability. We look around the world, we're looking at other currencies that are challenging the dollar, such as the BRICS. If you are unfamiliar with the BRICS, I would highly encourage you look at that over the weekend. So the dollar has been recently depegged as the only primary. So gold has been introduced. So we're seeing a shift, right? And when the dollar begins to tank to a degree that I think would be, let's call it expected result of the Keynesian economic nightmare, the introduction would be, here's a solution. Here is what we're going to do to solve this problem. But to that question, if that is the thing, then there would have to be a level of desperation and a cry for that solution. So then the solution is offered and people would accept it. Again, not a whole lot would change in most people's day-to-day life because they're already doing a lot of online transactions and so on and so forth. You would be issued a digital wallet, and so that would be your transaction. For offline transactions, you'd probably be given something akin to a flash drive or a card to some degree, and so that would track offline. Now, again, dollar goes away, or the debt goes away, the wealth goes away. Mixed feelings on that. You would be given a certain amount of CBDC to get you going. Here's enough to get you going. We'll get you squared away during this transition. And minds much greater than mine are the ones that have kind of thought about these things, how that would look. So does that answer that question?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Start running the microphone. Happy on.
Okay, everything you just said in the last 30 minutes just flew over my head.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I know, it's okay. I don't know a whole lot about money except how to spend it.
That's the fun part.
Now, you said that Bitcoin, our money would be safer than in our bank accounts. Is that correct?
There's an argument that could be made for that.
Okay. And when you said...
In fact, too safe to the point to where if you lose your information, you can't get it.
That's not good.
Right. So that's why we want to make sure that we have our information. But if you lost your information at the bank, somebody could figure that out for you.
So where is our money at? Is it at a central location in Washington? Or is it at a bank? Is it, where is this money? There's got to be a tangible...
Are we talking about cryptocurrency or money in general?
If I convert to cryptocurrency and follow the world.
Okay, either way, unless you have it on your person, there's a really good chance that your money is nothing more than zeros and ones. It's all digital. If you look into fractional banking, yeah, and again, it's a big topic. There's a lot to unpack here. But a good portion of the actual money that we have is on a computer. It's not real.
I understand that, but I can go pull it out whenever I want because
No,
right now I can't. because
not
I
whenever
have-
you want. Be careful about that because that's not true. If everybody in let's say this community decided they wanted to go pull all of their money out at the same time, there's not enough there.
Well,
You're not going to be able to pull it out whenever you want.
if
It's
I have $10,000 in my checking account, I can't go and pull it out.
you might have to wait a few days depending on the bank.
I don't think I like this idea.
A lot. Well, but see, that's the so if you had to wait 3 or 4 days to pull out 10 grand from your local bank, but you could go ahead and make a $10,000 transaction with your own decentralized currency, which would you choose?
Well, I guess I'm old school. I thought that's cash in my hand.
So you'd wait several days to do your business. Okay. And there we go, right? So there's different cases for both. And I'm not saying one is good or bad let me say this. There is one that I think is really good, right? And that's physical asset. But that's my opinion.
Just as long as it's not mandated.
Right. So I like physical asset because, again, you can buy a student a gun, 1913 for an ounce of gold. You can buy a student a gun today for an ounce of gold. Value of actual money remains. Value of currency declines, right? So if you wanted to hedge against inflation, you would get physical asset and you would hedge. This gets into a whole bunch of, I'm sorry. There's a use case, there's a pro and a con for just about everything, right? So if you wanted a bunch of gold in your safe, that could be problematic because you're not going to go to the store or to the car dealership with a bunch of bricks, right? So again, there's a lot of very interesting things and use cases even for our fiat currency, right? So a check or credit card or whatever it is, we continue to create ways to expedite commerce. And they all have inherent flaws, and they all have some amazing benefits. It just kind of depends on where we fall individually, which is why, in my opinion, again, just my opinion, we should always appeal to empowering the individual because that gives us more control of our ability to engage in commerce and in society. So,
with a central bank digital currency, will it have a fixed limit like Bitcoin has a hard fixed limit?
no.
And, okay, so my next question was how, we all understand that the debt ceiling has no stoppage ever. So the digital currency won't have a limit either, right?
Correct. And worst of all, they'll be able to manipulate those numbers at will. Okay? And so when we think about debt, right, we eliminate dollar debt and we go into a digital. Even if there was debt in a digital realm, they could enact with a hit of an enter key a negative rate, and that would slowly siphon off fractions of a penny or whatever it was over time, every transaction or whatever it is. It's funny because while there is some strong security cases in there, it's also the potential is there for some of the worst Hollywood movies you've ever seen about, hacking digital money ever, and so I'd have to look at some of those security measures and various guarantees, but we know that guarantees are temporary.
Sir?
Two more questions. First is, you might define some of your acronyms and stuff, because some of us are not in depth in that area. It would be helpful to be able to follow along.
Sure.
Other question I've got is, are you aware of any, is there anything going on, like any House of Representatives to kind of be a watchdog on this, the people have a voice and some input into this process to where it's not going to be foisted upon us and we can have some say and roll out of this?
All right, so first question, was there a specific acronym when I said CBDC, Central Bank Digital Currency? BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And then a whole bunch of others that are joining in rapid time. Was there another one?
Just what current, is there a legislative process going on?
Right. Yes and no. There's some back and forth. There's, I think, some posturing. But at the end of the day, it's moving forward. And it's moving forward globally. In fact, one of the interesting things that I saw this last week was a push for not only do we need a national digital currency, but we need the international digital currency alongside it. And so all of this would be run by the central banks, right? Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, there's some interesting cases that are going on with there. Now, people who see some of the dangers here are vocalizing things, and I think there's some lip service to it. However, again, the plans, the frameworks, the working out the bugs, the test cases, and so on and so forth, it's continuing to go. Meanwhile, the value of our dollar is still continuing to go down, and all right, I can get into this. If you were to think about our money, right? So I'll use me as a great example. My great-grandfather worked I would say an average job. It was just him. And he had he had a big house, a big family, he had plenty of money, provided for his family. And then my grandfather, similar thing, he worked hard, but grandma started to work a little bit. Things started to get a little tight. And then my parents, both of my parents worked, right? Things were still tight. It wasn't a huge family. There wasn't, a lot of things, the extra stuff. Couldn't take a vacation for months, sort of a thing. And then you look at my generation, it's on debt. Everything's on debt. What happens next? Right? So the value of our dollar is eroding in rapid time, and a lot of people don't see it. So we have to understand that, and I call it the Keynesian economic nightmare because it is. It's heading Keynesian economics, right? Keynesian economics, in a lot of ways, ends the exact same way, which is in a, right? You can kick the can down the road so far, you can only spend and borrow so long, or as it's been said, you cannot spend or you cannot borrow your way into prosperity, right? And so I think, what was it? Trying to remember who it was. It could have been Churchill. Don't quote me on that. But talking about, those ideas like sitting in a bucket and trying to lift yourself up, right? It's a funny analogy. When you think about those type of models, it doesn't end well. So we think about fiscal responsibility, we think about saving, we think about some of these things that allow us to weather rainy days. Tends to be a little bit better. But you can thank Ed Bernays for that. Again, conditioning, emotional contortion for emotional buys rather than personal and fiscal responsibility.
How are all these functions going to interact with one another? Retirement accounts, stocks, bonds, equity, buying life insurance, and all that. I mean, wow. Are we just going to worry about that later, like Bolsey said with Obamacare?
Yeah, so they will have plans in place. Again, some of that will be, if it is introduced, which again, there are countries around the world that are already doing it, right? So they're going to be looking at some of what they do. Oh, well, we like what they did there. We don't like what they did over here. Let's try to do this. So they're going to work it out. There are imperfections. Some of this stuff we don't know, but they're not going to leave everybody high and dry. They can't. If they did, revolt, right? So what they're going to try to do is appease. And the cool thing is when you're thinking about a digital type thing that doesn't have to be backed by anything, they're not really out anything by giving you a little bit extra. And I theorize that's probably what's going to sell it. Here's a little bit extra. Thank you for your participation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your comments with regards to convenience. You talked a lot about convenience, and you also talked a lot about empowering the individual versus the central bank.
Sure.
I'd like to give you a real-world scenario question and see how you respond to that.
Okay.
My family has to eat. I go here down to Dillon's. I pull my wallet out. I give them cash. I purchase whatever I need for food that day or whatever. All right. We're on a central banking system. All right. Is it possible that when I go to do a transaction at that point, because of someone somewhere else, clear across the world or the country, they could just say, I don't like your morals. I don't like the religion, and I don't particularly like the party that you represent, the political party you represent. We're canceling that right now.
Is it possible? Yes. Absolutely possible. When we think about, for instance, and again, all we have to really go off of is how other nations are kind of operating right now. There were a couple of interesting stories that happened this week where even in this country, where there was there was a situation this week where there was the cry of racism, and this person was technologically hooked into everything, and they just shut him off, right? Basically locked him out of his life because everything was integrated. So yes, there is that possibility. But the irony, and again, that's how we as individuals can navigate the future. Change is upon us, right? But there's a decision to make. Are we going to go this way, or are we going to go this way? When we understand that change is here, but we understand who wants to be in control, the conversation changes, right? So like right there, if you had, in that scenario, if you had cryptocurrency versus CBDC, right? And let's say the Dillons there will accept cash, credit, debit, CBDC, or I don't know, XRP. And you had XRP, and you walk in and you drop it in. It doesn't matter what anybody says because that's yours, right? So, but yes, simplistically, it's very possible.
Vice Chair with Pete.
This sounds like one key component to one world government where we have total control of everything we do.
Yeah, so absolutely. There's a lot of people who who would subscribe to that idea as well. And here's the thing, it's interesting because you got to understand that a lot of these big global powers are operating off of the idea that the more people there are, the more control there has to be, right? And so that's the excuse. Whether or not that's right or whether it's wrong, I mean, I don't think that's right. But yeah, there is that argument as well. So again, I would default to the idea of when we begin to ask the questions, whatever the topic is, when they're talking about trying to rile you, especially if you find yourself being emotionally involved. If you are emotionally involved, take a step back and ask yourself a question. Does this empower the individual, even if I dislike them? Does this empower the individual? Does it empower a global, national, or central bank power? And that'll help us navigate that.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I think that God wanted us to have separate societies with separate languages, and what this world government is trying to do is bring everybody together so that they can have control over them, and then we have to worry about being enslaved by this centralized government. There's too much power in one place, and I for one don't like it. It's a little frightening that they can turn off my control of the money and just squash me if they wanted to.
Right.
Just for what I might say one day.
Yeah.
Now, I do wonder if we can't control it, what happens to the stock market? You know, what happens to your money that you have invested in the stock market funds?
Man.
What have other countries done?
I'm sorry?
What have the other countries done? Russia and South Africa with their stock market and stuff.
Well, yeah, so again, when power is transferred, it's not created, okay? And so we have to understand that the more power that any entity has, it's because it was transferred from individuals, right? And so navigating that is kind of rough when you think about investments and you think about some of the things that have already been said. You can go find this online if you'd like to, but the idea of you will own nothing and like it, right? That is almost, I think that's a direct quote. You will, yeah, if not, it's really close. Is that correct?
Pretty close.
Okay.
It's actually Charles, or the guy that's head of the World Economic Forum.
Yeah. Schwab, thank you, yes. Right, and so there is that element, right? And so, yeah, I mean, legitimate concerns, absolutely. But the funny thing is, and this is my frustration and the irony of that situation, is that the things that we could be doing to ensure our power, most people are being, again, astroturfed into supporting the things that are hurting them most, right? And it's really interesting because in doing so, we are propping up the things that our founders made very clear we shouldn't be propping up. And that gets into a political discussion that is uncomfortable for a lot of people to hear, but yes.
Well, it's been brought up a little bit before, but I'm concerned about the ability of somebody being able to hit a switch, and because they don't like my religion or my politics or something, everything that I have is no longer there. And you say that this is something that is going to happen, it is happening, so two things. And that we need to control the direction we go. How do we control the direction as individuals, and have any of these disasters occurred in any of the countries that have already made the switch to CBDC? Hacking, elimination of individual property, wealth. Have we seen any of that, and how can we steer this in the right direction for us if it's inevitable?
Okay, very good question. Have we seen disasters and things like that? If there were, we would not be told about that. So as of right now, we're not being told anything overly negative. So far, all of the test cases are unbelievably sound and absolutely, just everything's moving along just like we need it to. I think probably man, that was such a good question. What can we do? What can we do to retain our power in the face of technology and change? Be careful. Be very mindful of who you support. All things with purpose, for purpose, on purpose, right? Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution states clearly that we are guaranteed a Republican form of government. But a lot of people couldn't tell you the difference between a democracy and a republic if their life depended on it. Simplistically, we're looking at, one, we're electing leaders to exercise our power on our behalf. Or two, we're electing leaders to make decisions for us. Now, that's a thin line, but it's an important line. The responsibility resides in us. And if we don't seize that, we will lose it. That is a historical norm. Benjamin Franklin made that very clear. We have a republic if we can keep it. But I'll say this, there's not a single right in the Bill of Rights that's not currently being infringed upon. We have people all over this country who have sworn an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution and are doing nothing about it because we are astroturfed into confusion, throw our hands up, and neglect or deny our responsibility. Right? Thank you. Sorry, passionate moment there.
Why don't you define astroturf?
Astroturf.
Back here with Glenn.
Thank you for your presentation. I believe you're saying that CBDC is the direction that we're likely to go rather than crypto. But I would like to know if you had looked at how BlackRock is preparing, Amazon is preparing, the Post Office, Elon Musk, any of the rich and wealthy. What are they doing to prepare for this?
I think I got a new best friend. Yeah, there's an argument to be made that BlackRock is controlling it. Right? You think about oh man, the numbers there are staggering. Yeah, it would actually behoove those entities to have that situation. Absolutely. So I would say that in a lot of ways, well, they are preparing for it. They're some of these companies are actually helping to engineer it. Although, because the question mark of where it might go is sort of still up in the air. Man, we could almost look at Estonia as an example. Estonia I think, was the first digital government, everything online, everything from investments to, driver's licenses, whatever. To answer it plainly, everything. They're preparing for it in everything that they do. And they're acquiring as much power as humanly possible, including their subdivisions. And matter of fact, there are a couple of great, we'll call them fringe documentaries about BlackRock specifically. If you were to just go onto YouTube, you can find them. I would encourage you to look at as a very diverse perspective about what BlackRock is doing, especially regarding their AI and algorithm uses.
I've heard that blockchain technology was fundamental, that Bitcoin could not exist without that technology in place. Is that something you would agree with or not? Because if it is indeed true, I was curious if central bank digital currencies are all the, what I call Bitcoin wannabes. Ethereum, there's a whole bunch, literally like hundreds of thousands, maybe tens of thousands of Bitcoin wannabes out there that are operating. Are they all based on this blockchain technology platform?
Good question. Good question. Simplistically, no, not all of them are based on blockchain. There are some that are loosely based on blockchain, but it's a little bit more centralized. There are some cryptocurrencies which are actually built specific. I'll give you a great example. XRP, Ripple Labs, that is designed specifically for cross-border payments. So it's to take one currency and provide it to another in rapid time rather than SWIFT, which will take a week or whatever. But on the other side of that, and I think the point to your question, yes, most of them are built on a blockchain type of technology. Some are better than others. Bitcoin was there, it's decentralized, it was sort of a mystery for a long time, but it was also the first, and there are inherent bugs in it. Not that would harm your money in any way, but just some inherent bugs regarding efficiencies. And so some of these other companies and organizations have tried to improve upon that, and a lot of them have.
This cryptocurrency is issued by the FDIC. The other question is, can you buy a stock in cryptocurrency? If so, what's the name of the stock, please?
Okay. What was the first question?
FDIC.
FDIC. Yeah, so in a lot of ways, FDIC will be, well, I've seen arguments that the FDIC will basically go away because there won't be any need for them. IRS will not be the IRS. It'll be something a little bit different because not going to be needed. Most of it will happen through just programming. But again, remember, taxation is a big part of what they're trying to do there. Can you buy cryptocurrency and stock in that? Sort of. It's not necessarily stock. You are buying the physical coin. So you can use platforms such as Coinbase. Coinbase gives you, is an American-based company. It allows you to trade your digital dollar basically for a variety of different types, from Bitcoin, Ethereum, to some of the smaller use case and functional coins, such as XRP, for example. But Coinbase is decent. If you don't want to play that game, now I'm starting to get into something a little bit more technical, but there are other platforms around the world that you can engage in. But that's where you'll use something called a VPN. Again, that's getting very technical.
No, don't get technical.
I won't get technical there, but if there's, I'll say this, a lot of people will use that type of stuff to get the coins that they can't get here locally. The United States government, Australia, and England have done a very good job of trying to rein in and stop people from buying certain types of coins.
David, is there anything positive that you can share with us? Moving forward from this point.
I love you, buddy. I love you, buddy.
And freedom.
Yes.
And how to protect ourselves from what appears to be authoritarian.
Yeah. So again, you know, it's interesting. The cryptocurrency case is the strong one there is for personal liberty, right? Because the various coins you can get involved in based on use case or because of your preference or whatever. You know, one of the things Carl was talking about is the variety of things out there. Absolutely. There's coins that are issued by churches, right? So if you wanted to participate in the church, but it was church money, church crypto, you could do that, right? But then there's larger use cases. There's the investment side of it. There are some really cool things that are happening on the crypto decentralized side of things that are, and that's why, by the way, the SEC is fighting so hard. If you were curious to see just how strong this fight is, you could look up SEC and Ripple, and you will have months and months and months and months of information to look at this fight about how the SEC has been really going after Ripple. and a variety of others trying to say, no, you can't do it because we're going to, which is also prelude.
All right, round of applause for our speaker today.
I think we had a
We'll stick around.